So, welcome, Vincent Deary. I
Thank
want
you.
to ask what attracted you to writing How We Break, which is a book about what makes people break down.
Yeah, I think attracted is overselling it to a degree. I think, but it has been my preoccupation for the last 10 years is kind of working in this book. And it was always part of my project, my writing project, to look at the kind of creatures we are and what happens to us when we get pushed to our limits. So that was always the idea behind it. And it took quite a few more years to finish than I thought it would. And there's a few reasons for that. And that to tell you why might give you some flavor of the book. I think if you look at what's happened in the world over the last 10 years, it has become a very different place, or it feels different. It feels like there's a lot more obvious threat and uncertainty than there used to be. And very fundamental things that we used to rely on, like truth and consensus and expert and politics to a degree, everything seems to be up in the air. So as I was writing the book, the world kept getting more and more kind of uh, impactful on us. I think is one way to look at it. So there was that element, but then more personally, I saw my friends and colleagues struggle with life. I saw some people, end up crossing the clinical line into anxiety or depression. But just more generally, I saw people that I loved and cared about really struggle with work, with status, with day-to-day life. I saw my mother slide into a depression in the last few years of her life and kind of stay there, and that was quite difficult. Not difficult to watch, much more difficult to experience, but yeah, it seemed everyone around me, including myself, seemed to be struggling. And at the same time, I was working in a transdiagnostic fatigue clinic. What that means is that we saw people who, whatever their diagnosis, be it liver disease, autoimmune conditions, cancer, people who were worn out, people who were fatigued came to see us. And again, what really that brought home to me is how much our struggling and our breaking is not just mental and emotional, it's also physical. So I guess, long story short, my thinking about how we break and how we struggle evolved over the last 10 years with both personal and kind of more general experience.
You think that we tend to break up our health into physical and mental in a way that's unhelpful to us?
To a degree, I think, yeah, a simple yes, it is absolutely true. And I think if I had written this book 10 years ago, I think I might have done the same because I think we often, particularly if you look at things like cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'm a practitioner of, but I think in its most simplistic form, it can say you just need to change your thinking and your behavior. Uh, and what I was seeing around me is not that people were not thinking well enough or not doing their best. They were absolutely doing their best, but they were embroiled in circumstances which was directly affecting their physical, their mental, and their emotional health. People were getting worn out, they were getting exhausted. And as a result of that, and as a result of my own academic discipline of health psychology, which looks much more at the physical along with the mental, I have become much more aware that we aren't just minds, we aren't just emotions, we're also bodies, and that those three systems of mind, emotion, and body, they talk to each other, they interact with each other. So, for instance, if we think about people who are in chronically stressful situations, like people who are caring for other people or people going through really hard times, that will not only affect their feelings and they'll not only be more worried and hypervigilant, it will affect things like their immune functioning, their inflammation, their basic nervous system, like the bits it switches on and off, they will become a bit dysregulated as well. So it affects our whole being. And I think psychology is beginning to realize that it is the body, the mind, and the heart all talk to each other. Because if you think about your experience, it's all happening to you. You know, we our day-to-day experience, we don't make those separations. It's often only when we go to see experts that we get divided up into bits. And so, yeah, I'm sorry that was a very long answer, but
No,
yes.
perfect. Very good answer. And how do you think the COVID lockdown and the actual, pandemic harmed people's well-being? Do you think we can really start working out what it's done to the way we are?
I, the hard scientist in me thinks we probably need to be doing, and some people are doing, looking at the long-term consequences of that, and that we need to be actually talking more to people, doing good, both qualitative, i.e., going and interviewing people, and perhaps doing more quantitative measures of the impact. And I think that's still emerging. But I think that the more personal human answer of what I saw in the clinic, what I saw in myself, in my friends, is that it just added to the level of perceived danger, threat, and difficulty that was at loose in the world. So taking it back to thinking something about the kind of creatures that we are, we all have a stress biology that is very rightly attuned to threat. It will kind of gear us up when we detect some danger. And for a while, the world became very dangerous for us all. And I saw this happen in the clinic. I saw people with fatigue who had worked very hard to kind of reclaim a slightly bigger world, take some risk, go further afield, go into town, go into shops. And that had been hard won physical and emotional labor. And then when the pandemic hit, people really shrank again. People's worlds shrank.
Mm.
And a weird upside of that for a lot of the people that I work with, and a few people said this, was I think now other people will appreciate what my world has been like. So people with chronic illness who have been stuck in very small worlds, who couldn't get far outside their homes, who were having to do online shopping. For a while, they felt less alone.
Yeah.
Some of them did, which I thought was a really interesting kind of weirdly silver lining for some people.
Mm.
But I think, yeah, I think the world became a more dangerous place. And I see it in myself and my friends. I think we're all still struggling to a degree to begin to come out and make those connections. I think we've become a little bit world shy
Mm.
collectively, and maybe a little more distrustful. But like I said, that is my kind of personal impression rather than hard scientific evidence. But certainly that's what I saw in the clinic, and that's what I see in my friends.
Fatigue is a special interest of yours. You've been working as a health psychologist in a fatigue clinic.
Mm.
How does fatigue relate to depression?
So the slightly circuitous answer to that would be that I've never seen two cases of fatigue that look the same. And if you think of the things that have caused it in people, and if you think of how they're experiencing it and the impact on it, on their life, it's always highly individualized. For sure, there's a commonality. People are exhausted, but the cause and the consequences of it are really highly individualized. And it's the same in the research we've done with head and neck cancer patients, with older adults with fear of falling. Anytime you kind of zoom in on something under a diagnostic label like fatigue, fear of falling, depression, what you find is a case that looks totally different from other cases. And for sure, there are family resemblances between them. But for instance, my mum's depression in the latter years of her life was really marked by an intense fury and regret and a kind of cognitive perseveration. Whereas other people I see who are depressed, they're much more lethargic and exhausted, and depression and fatigue are much more entwined for some people.
Mm.
So I think depression is often, if we can put it this way, it can be a key ingredient. Fatigue can be a key ingredient of depression, but it's sometimes there and it sometimes isn't, but it's never enough to kind of make the dish in itself. I think you need to add other factors like difficult emotions, worry, low self-worth. Those things go along with it. And that's the approach I tried to take in the book, is rather than look at diagnostic labels, let's kind of dig underneath them and see what processes are going on in each case. So, like I said, that's a slightly circuitous answer to the question. I think they're related and they often go together, but it's digging underneath those labels. It's when you get the richest data.
Yeah. Do you think that the younger generation protect their health more than older generations? And what are the key reasons why you think that might have changed?
So I think one of the things that has, well, it's certainly changed between my generation and this generation. So I grew up gay in a working class Scottish town in the 60s and 70s, where it was not okay to be gay. I had to hide who I was uh, for a long time. It took me a long time to actually be, you know, me, in a sense. And I think it's true for a lot of queer folk of my generation. It was a long struggle. And I think the lovely thing about seeing this generation is there is now the expectation that circumstance will to some degree conform to their needs and accept their needs. And I think that is just something that to me feels new and rather exciting. I think we often felt we just had to get on with it. We just had to accommodate, hide ourselves, push down our anxieties, not admit to weaknesses or faults. And some people think that's tipped too far the other way, but I think it's probably a necessary correction in the system. That younger generation are more able to be honest about their vulnerabilities. There is this phenomenon which I think it's been called quiet quitting in the younger generation. And as far as I can make out, I could be wrong about this, but it seems to basically be saying we will work as much as we are paid to work and within the hours, and we will take breaks. And I think that rethinking of the relationship to work is again something that the younger people are leading us on, which I think is going to be really useful because I've seen too many people, both in my clinical and my personal life, get really damaged by an unhealthy relationship with work. So yeah, I do think younger people are getting better at saying this is what's going on with us and this is maybe what we need to do about that.
You've written in the book quite a lot about yourself and your family, friends, lovers, as well as using medical research, historical, cultural content. How do people respond to this unusual mix, do you think?
Variously, I think. I, as we speak, there's been, I think, 3 or 4 reviews have come out of the book, and people seem to be really liking that. I've had some lovely responses, and not just from reviewers, but some individuals have written to me after reading that book or the first book. And I think the fact that it is quite, how do I put this? It's always hard to describe your own work, but I think because it's got a human heart at the center of it. I'm not saying, hey, look, here's my damage, but I am saying I'm as vulnerable, and here's some of mine, here's some of other people. This is what it looked like in someone I really care about. I think there is a compassion in the work that seems to be resonating with people. And I think there are some people who really like the fact that it isn't just an academic book. It's also drawing on real life experience. It's drawing on film. It's drawing on literature. Because for me, it's certainly growing up reading some of the great works. You often see, for instance, in George Eliot, I think you see a picture of human nature that is as subtle as anything in Freud. And so I think drawing on the arts as well as on the psychological and social sciences has been really important.
Mm.
And I also think that to honor the complexity of our own individual suffering, I think we need to do that. Because I think for some of us, it may just be a biological thing, but for most people, it will be a complex interplay of factors. It's what Henry James called each of us will have our own terrible algebra of suffering. You know, will be a complex equations of many different bits. It could be a difficult relationship, a bit of work is thrown in there, some physical illness, getting abroad with a benefit system that's not particularly kind to you. I think if you dig into the reality of suffering, it is a complex mix of things. And that's partly what I was trying to capture in the book.
And finally, what would you most like people to take away from the book, How We Break?
Be kind to yourself, I think. And something I've learned from working with people who struggle with life is take time to rest and recover before things get to breaking point. You might almost call it prophylactic resting. So make sure that some of the energy that you've got is devoted to stuff that gives you something back, that gives you joy, that gives you uplift, that gives you some kind of nutrition, spiritual nutrition, for want of a better way of putting it. And yeah, I think that's really key. And I think the related message to that is uncoupling our own sense of self-worth from our productivity. I think that's a cultural narrative that we've all bought into, is that we're as good as our last performance review. I think if we think about what we value in other people, it's rarely their productivity, it's their kindness and their gentleness. And I think beginning to learn to value those kind of traits in ourselves. So yeah, but the short answer would be kind to yourself.
That's fantastic, Vincent. I really enjoyed speaking to you, and I hope the rest of your promotional time goes well.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay.
It's been a joy talking to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.